Welcome back to The Christian View. You know, all the NFL stories coming out about the abusive relationships, domestic violence. Lee, why do women stay? Why do you think they stay in a domestic violence relationship?
Well, when you look, I think you have to do more of a pragmatic approach and look back into the woman's life, her prior experiences prior to the marriage or the relationship. You know, research says that over most times, and when you look at a situation, if a young woman has been a victim of verbal or physical abuse as a child, then she tends to think that is normal growing up into adulthood, and she accepts it. So I think that it may, in some sordid kind of way, has become a way of life, and it's become an acceptable practice that either I'm going to allow this emotional abuse to take place, verbal abuse, or even the physical abuse.
Right. And fear comes into play too. Like, a lot of women are afraid to leave. As bad as it is where she is, she's afraid to be alone. Loneliness keeps her in something horrible, when it would be better for her to get out and be alone than to stay in that.
Yes. And sometimes that's the case, but women are really put in their biggest place of danger when they finally decide to leave. If you've got a physical abuser, they are really putting their lives at risk, so they have to prepare ahead of time. If you've got a woman who's, and you know, if you're out there and you're concerned that your mate may physically harm you and you want to leave your mate, there are 800 numbers where you can call the U.S., you know, domestic abuse hotline.
Yes, and we're going to be giving you those numbers.
Yeah,
yes.
So you can get the help, but prepare ahead of time. Have a safety plan in place when you're prepared to leave. And if you need to not let him know, then just don't let him know.
You know, while we're asking the question, you know, why is she staying? I think we should also be asking the question, why are you abusing? You know, what's happening with the men that are abusing the women? Because once that relationship is over and we can get her away from that man,
he's still going to be doing it.
Woman that is going to be a victim of that abuse.
You know, there was a study done that alcohol is used in over 80%. 80% of the domestic, that abuser used it that day. And so I think alcohol and the tie-in between the two, you know, you just can't ignore. You have to pay attention to. But and a lot of times I think it's because the women don't have a personal safety plan, a way to get out. They don't feel like there's a way out. And the other thing about domestic abuse is it takes away your dignity. It beats you down to the point emotionally that you don't feel you have the courage or the strength to move
forward. And if they're children, that just makes it that much harder.
But what you need to understand is that when children are involved, those children are at risk. Those children are at risk being exposed to that abuse, that they're going to become abusers, or like you said, Pastor, they're going to be abused and accepted as acceptable behavior as they grow.
There's an app now on your phone that if you feel threatened, you could do it. And so your abuser, if they walked in the room, they wouldn't even know what you were doing. And in that, you already have like a pre-planned set of contacts, and it does the contacting for you, if I read it correctly. And I thought, wow, that's a great thing that a woman could just feel the freedom. I can just click that, and I don't have to worry about hanging up or getting off the computer. It's there in place.
Good. But there is such a thing, I'm sorry, there is such a thing as victor-abuser bonding, you know, where you're emotionally bound. And I think you talked a little bit about the woman begins to get beat down and begins to feel insecure and insignificant. And all abusers, I would say all abusers, after they've done a physical, verbal, emotional, put down, whatever, they generally regret. They come back and try to make it up.
Yeah. The honeymoon period.
I was going to ask just the ladies your opinion on also the reverse abuse, where the male is the abused person in the relationship. You know,
it's out there.
We tend to see that a lot, and you know, I'm wondering if as a society we're not being hypocritical when we look at one of the most recent, the NFL stories, and we see this guy punching this young lady, and immediately, you know, we all jump on the bandwagon. His career and his whole family and everything is kind of tossed out the window. But then I remember trending not too long ago, there was Jay-Z and his sister-in-law in the elevator, and she was definitely the aggressor, but it kind of just dwindled out. So are we being hypocritical when it's abuse from a woman to a man, and then when a man, you know, to a woman?
Abuse is wrong, no matter who is the abuser.
what man would want to come forward? It would probably be very
No.
embarrassing
They're not
to
going
say
to.
my wife is
Yes.
abusing me, because most people would say, well, do something about it, you know,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Right.
Yes.
So how humbling would that be for a man
I have
to
actually
step forward with that info?
counseled men in one of the situations was he called the cops on his wife, and he reports the cops laughed at him when he got there because he, you know, he did not want to become physical with his wife, and he wanted them to remove her out of the situation, but the cops actually thought that was a man can't control his wife. You know?
We had two friends that got physical with one another. Well, she got physical with him, and actually harmed him with a utensil, and his daughter ended up calling 911. 911 got out there and arrested both of them.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
that's the thing with domestic abuse, that the burden of proof is always put on the victim.
Right.
Yes.
You know, they've got to prove that. And the other thing about it too is that if you report this, say at a church or a
Right.
school, we're mandated
to report it.
reporters,
Right.
and so intervention has to take place.
But do you think there's something we can do from our pulpits? 50% of the people sitting out in our congregations on any given Sunday morning have dealt with abuse in their life,
Right.
and may have it ongoing. There's a large percentage of them that have ongoing abuse.
You all talked about something earlier. I think when you were talking about gender, there are fundamental differences between men and women. And I think when we come to understand and accept that we are different, that we require different things, I think then we'll begin to see more or less of the abuse. One of the things I do from my pulpit, my members can tell you, I make them hug a lot. I think rather hugging versus hitting. And I think if people hug more and you get used to hugging more in that setting, even intimate with your spouse, I think there'll be less
It's a
hitting.
good touch.
That's really
Good touch
good.
versus
We've
bad touch.
got to talk about it. You know, in our men's conferences, our women's
Yeah.
conferences, we've got to touch on this subject, because a lot of people don't even think it's abuse unless the person has been battered and is in the hospital.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's abuse if someone is being put down on a regular basis or made to feel controlled, intimidated, threatened.
Yes.
You know, all of those things. It doesn't have to be a touching effect, but that completely destroys that person down, and that is abuse, and it should not be tolerated.
I understand your point, because abuse is not just physical.
It's not.
You know, it can be verbal abuse, and it shouldn't be accepted either way.
I think the emotional is worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think that?
I think it really takes a toll on a person. It begins to mess with a person's psychic versus their physical being.
Well, you've
Counselors say that they'd rather have a couple that's coming in kind of because they still care, but when they come in with those disconnected eyes and they don't care anymore.
Thank you so much. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now stay with us on Facebook. Thank you.